In the last episode of History Traveler, we kicked off the biggest history summer road trip across America on Route 66. Started off up in Chicago and where Route 66 begins, made our way all the way down to Pontiac, Illinois, where we kind of laid out the foundation of what we were going to be doing and learned some of the history behind Route 66. I happen to be standing right on a decommissioned portion of Route 66 right now. I'm in Lexington. We're headed to Springfield, Illinois to check out some history sites there. But there was something that I wanted to stop and show in this spot. As you're driving along Route 66, well, all along the road you'll see these signs letting you know that you are on the historic route. And in some spots, you'll also see these signs at the bottom showing you a couple of different paths. So Route 66 went through a number of different changes and realignments. And right up ahead, where you can see the decommissioned road off to our right, you can't drive on that. But here it shows you that off to the left is the section of road that existed between 1926 and 1930, and then ahead of us, going straight, is the section of road from 1930 to 1977. Well, here in Lexington, they have something called Memory Lane, where you can actually drive this old section of the road. As we're making our way down the road, we're going to stop from time to time and show little odds and ends. So I just happened to see this, and they have a little roadside marker here, a little information panel talking about the motor police. So the Illinois State Police was formed in 1922 to protect motorists who are going to be traveling along these roads. It says that 20 officers patrolled the state on surplus World War I Harley-Davidson motorcycles. And then in the 1930s, it was updated with radio communication. So all kinds of little cool bits of information here. Quick stop in Atlanta, Illinois, which is the land of the Giants. And they have an American Giants Museum all about these big figures that were used in advertising, but, well, unfortunately, we're rolling through when it is closed. All right, we have made our way down to Springfield, Illinois. And when you come to Springfield, Illinois, everywhere you look, you see stuff on Abraham Lincoln. We're actually going to be checking off a few boxes today. In addition to helping to meet the goal of traveling Route 66, we're also going to visit the tomb of Lincoln. I have a goal, it's kind of goofy, of visiting all of the presidential grave sites. But first, we're going to go right here to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum. I've never been here before, so this is going to be kind of a new thing for me. I know that this is also the home, the place where Lincoln's home is located, and we just don't have time to hit all of it today. So since I've never been here before, we're going to check this out. All right, so we just got into the museum here, and as you enter this main receiving area, well, you have the Lincoln family welcoming you. So here, of course, we have Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd Lincoln, and their three sons, Robert, Tad, and Willie. They had a fourth son by the name of Eddie, who had died prior to Lincoln going into the White House, and their son Willie would also die while Lincoln was president. So they have some different, like, little galleries and things to walk through. So we're just going to kind of make our way through the museum and, yeah, see what they have. So here in the museum, as you start learning about Lincoln's life, well, of course, you're going to start at his humble beginnings in a log cabin. And over here, they have a pretty good overview of the early years of Abraham Lincoln. Okay, so he is born in 1809 near Hodgdon, Kentucky. Here you can see, depiction of the log cabin that he was born in. This was going to be kind of a big deal in his life. And then the family moves to Knob Creek, Kentucky. He has a brother who dies in infancy in 1812. 1815, he briefly attends a log schoolhouse with his sister Sarah. Lincoln actually largely taught himself how to read, so he's kind of a driven individual. 1816, he almost drowns, and then family ends up moving to a one-room cabin near Little Pigeon Creek, Indiana. And 1818 gets kicked in the head by a horse, and it was said that he was apparently killed for a time. Also in that same year, his mother dies, and this is going to kind of be the beginnings of a life that is beset with tragedy for Abraham Lincoln. So we just walked into the first room here, showing this one-room log cabin, and you can just imagine an entire family living in here. So the way that it worked is, after Lincoln's mother died, well, his father remarried to a woman named Sarah Bush Johnston, and they would, in this one-room log cabin, well, they would sleep in the bed. The boys would sleep upstairs, and then the girls would sleep downstairs under the covers. And then here they're showing young Abraham Lincoln by the fireplace. It sounds like there's some snoring going on. He's right here by the dog, doing one of the things that he loved to do the most, which is to read. Again, he largely taught himself how to read. So, yeah, pretty amazing. As we move through the exhibit, we start getting into the life of Lincoln as a young man, and here they have two silver Liberty $50, and Lincoln had got a job ferrying passengers on the Ohio River, and he recalled making his first dollar. He says that he could hardly believe that he had earned $1 in less than a day. And here they have another one of these panels that kind of go through the life of Lincoln. And here you see from 1820 to 25, he attends school a little bit, and then here's his job in 1827 ferrying passengers on the Ohio. And then in 1828, he takes a flatboat down the Mississippi, running supplies down towards New Orleans. And it is during this time that he probably was exposed to slavery for the first time. And he later said that there was no time when slavery didn't have the power to just make him feel miserable. So yeah, this was going to be kind of a pivotal time that was going to heavily influence Lincoln's future. Here in this next room, they have a quote by Lincoln that kind of encapsulates his feelings on slavery. He says, "As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master. This expresses my idea of democracy. Whatever differs from this, to the extent of the difference, is no democracy." So during Lincoln's time, the one issue that just was constantly at the forefront of this country was the issue of slavery. So here they talk about the Missouri Compromise, and that came to fruition in 1821, and also the Compromise of 1850. Again, these are all compromises regarding slavery. So people who say that slavery wasn't a root cause of the Civil War are really kind of ignoring history. It's not like, it's kind of weird that slavery is the main issue all the way up until the Civil War, and then all of a sudden it's not an issue anymore. Here they talk about the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And then here they're depicting these individuals being sold on a slave auction block. So it was Lincoln's first trips down to New Orleans that were going to be very fundamental in shaping his ideas that would come to play later on in his life. So Lincoln would have several different jobs in his lifetime. He was a shopkeeper and also a postmaster, a surveyor. He actually served with the U.S. military in the Black Hawk War, but his greatest ambition was to become a lawyer. So he eventually moves to Springfield, Illinois, and it's while he is here that he is going to meet his future wife, Mary Ann Todd. He was kind of drawn to her because of her wit and also her interest in politics. They had kind of a common bond there. Their marriage would be kind of tumultuous. It's probable that she may have had some mental health issues, and it was said that their marriage could be a little bit rocky at times. They have several artifacts here in the museum. We're not going to be able to show all of them, but this one in particular is the original headstone for one of their sons. This is the headstone for Edward. He died of tuberculosis in 1850, and the headstone was kind of repurposed after the body of Eddie was moved to the current location at Lincoln's tomb, and then was later rediscovered, and now it's here in the museum. Here's something that's kind of interesting. This is a sundial that was owned and used by Lincoln's grandfather, whose name was also Abraham Lincoln. So Lincoln was named after his grandfather. His grandfather was a Revolutionary War veteran and likely used this sundial in his work. Moved to Kentucky in the 1780s, and there was some conflict with the indigenous people there, and he was actually killed by some of the Indians in front of his son Thomas, who was Lincoln's father. All right, we just walked into Lincoln's law office, and this is a dang mess. This is really kind of wild, actually. So this is depicting his sons Willie and Tad, who I guess were kind of, pretty spirited individuals. And Lincoln's law partner, William Herndon, said these children would come to our office and take down books, empty buckets, coal ashes, inkstands, gold pens, put them in a pile, and then dance on the pile. Lincoln would say nothing, so blinded was he to his children's faults. I'm thinking that Lincoln should have maybe given these kids a little bit of discipline, because this is a wreck. Here we get into a part of the walk that talks about Lincoln's political life, and they have something that is really interesting here as far as artifacts go. So Lincoln was anti-slavery. There's no denying that, but he kind of had to juggle his anti-slavery position with what the law of the land was at the time. So here is a letter that Lincoln wrote in 1845, looks like October of 1845, and in it he's urging an abolitionist from what was called the Liberty Party to support the Whigs instead, basically because not doing so empowered the Democrats to push forward their pro-slavery agenda. So anyway, this was, again, 1845, so Lincoln is going to have to be walking this tightrope for the next 20 years. So, of course, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln is elected as president, first Republican president in the United States. Here you can see like this big, poster celebrating the election of Lincoln, but immediately he is going to be walking into a crisis as his election is basically going to trigger the secession crisis. All right, so here in the museum, they kind of divide Lincoln's life up into two parts. There's the early part, his growing up years, his early life in politics, and then his time in the White House. I mentioned how Abraham Lincoln's life is beset by tragedy, and that would follow him to the White House. So not only is he having to deal with this secession crisis, but 2 weeks after the presidential ball, his son Willie would die from typhoid fever. So here you can see this scene where Lincoln is at the door, and you have Mary Todd Lincoln here at the bedside by her son, and this would, of course, grieve both of them as it would any parent. Mary Todd Lincoln never entered the room again where her son had passed away, but it was said that Lincoln would come back into the room from time to time and just sit quietly and grieve his son. So this man just had the weight of the world on his shoulders during his time as president. Here in this room, we have a depiction of Lincoln in a cabinet meeting, reading a draft of his Emancipation Proclamation, which of course was the document that was going to free the slaves in the southern states. Of course, the slave states that remained loyal to the Union, that would be Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware, it would not apply to them. And there was a lot of controversy about the Emancipation Proclamation, as you might expect. There were some thought that it went way too far. There were some who thought that it didn't go far enough. In the end, Lincoln ended up kind of following the advice of his Secretary of State, a guy by the name of William Seward, who you see depicted there on the left. He was concerned that the proclamation, if it was issued too early, would make the Union look desperate. So he counseled that they should wait until there was some sort of battlefield victory, because the Confederates had really been on a tear up to this point. He said we should wait, or that the Union should wait for a battlefield victory before issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. And of course, that is going to come after the Battle of Antietam. I'm always fascinated at seeing how the presidency ages people. So here's a picture of Lincoln in 1860. Here he is in 1861, 1863. That's probably one of the more famous images of Lincoln right there. 1864. And then by 1865, and it's only been 5 years, but it looks like he's aged 40 in that time. And here they have a couple of bronze castings of Lincoln's, well, in this case on the left, Lincoln's hands and face in 1860, and then of his face in 1865. So you can really see just how the war and the presidency and all the stress that he was under has aged him. Again, I'm not able to show everything in here today. You'll have to just make a trip to Springfield, Illinois and come visit the museum for yourself. But these artifacts that we are looking at here are items that were used in support of the re-election of Abraham Lincoln. So this is kind of a political campaign poster, like a little temporary newspaper that was handed out to people. And then there are also a couple of little coins that were encouraging people to vote for Abraham Lincoln in the 1864 election. And then they also have these interesting paper items that are connected to slavery. So this one right here, this is a bill of sale from 1832 where a 20-year-old man by the name of Dennis was sold from one enslaver to another. And this is an 1855 broadside for the sale of, as you can see, real estate and slaves. This was from Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which is south of where we are right now. Something that was kind of ironic about the legal status of slaves as quote-unquote property is that when the Civil War rolls around, the U.S. government was able to say, oh, okay, well, if these people are considered property, we can confiscate that property in support of the war. So anyway, yeah, interesting artifacts here. If you've watched our past videos, we have several that we've done at Gettysburg, so this scene should be familiar. This is depicting the fighting on Cemetery Hill. There you can see the cemetery gatehouse of Evergreen Cemetery in the background, and this is also going to be where in November of 1863, so later on in that same year, Lincoln is going to deliver one of the most famous speeches of all time that became known as the Gettysburg Address. So finally we get to the scene at Ford's Theater. The Civil War has ended. Lincoln is finally able to have a few moments of peace, and on Good Friday, he and his wife go to Ford's Theater to watch a play called Our American Cousin. And shortly before 10 o'clock, it was said that Mary Todd Lincoln leans over to Abraham Lincoln. They've been, holding hands, and she says, what will Miss Harris think of me hanging on to you so? And Lincoln leans over and replies, she won't think anything of it. And those would be the last words that were uttered by President Abraham Lincoln. At about 10:15, as you can see depicted here, John Wilkes Booth slips into the presidential box, moves up behind Lincoln, and puts a derringer to the back of his head right behind his left ear and squeezes the trigger. So Lincoln, of course, is shot at a moment in the play when there's kind of like a big burst of laughter, and then he is taken across the street to the Peterson House, where he is declared dead the next morning. And the Secretary of War, Andrew Stanton, upon his death, uttered the words, "Now he belongs to the ages." We have moved just a few miles down the road, and we are currently at the Oak Ridge Cemetery. And right here behind us is the final resting place of Abraham Lincoln. But there's another place here on the site that also served as his resting place for a short time. We've moved behind the tomb and memorial and down the hill a little bit. And what we are looking at is the receiving chamber for President Abraham Lincoln's body. So a couple days after the assassination, a group of Springfield citizens got together and proposed building a tomb and memorial to Abraham Lincoln, but obviously that was going to take some time. So on May the 3rd, his body arrived here in Springfield, Illinois, laid in state at the Capitol overnight. It had made its way across the country on a funeral train. And on May the 4th of 1865, there was a funeral ceremony, and Lincoln's remains were laid to rest right here in this place. They remained here until December 21st of 1865, and then were again removed to another temporary chamber that was about halfway up the ridge. And then they finally finished the tomb that we know today, enough to where it could receive the remains of him and his sons. But yeah, this was the original holding chamber of Lincoln's body. We've now moved back up to the top of the hill to the tomb of Abraham Lincoln. In 1871, prior to this being completely finished, the body of Lincoln and his three sons, Tad had died in 1871, were brought and interred here. And here at the front, you can see this bronze casting of a marble bust that was done of Lincoln by Gustav Borglum. This is the man who is behind Mount Rushmore and also the Confederate North Carolina Memorial at Gettysburg, and also the Confederate Memorial on Stone Mountain. But anyway, like I said, this is a bronze recasting, and you can see that Lincoln's nose is well polished, because people think that it's good luck to rub his nose when they come here. But the monument itself was completed in 1874, and as with most of the places that I go, this one is undergoing some sort of renovation or improvements or something like that. This happens to me often, so we'll kind of take a look at what we can. If you look up here, of course, you can see a statue of Lincoln. All around him on the four corners are representations of the military at the time. So you had infantry, cavalry, artillery, and the Navy. And then there are 40 shields that are surrounding the base. 37 of them have the names of the states that were in the Union at the time, and then the remaining 3 say USA. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and go inside and take a look at the interior of the tomb. Well, here in the rotunda of this memorial is the final resting place of Abraham Lincoln. Now, he is not in the sarcophagus that we see here in front of us. He's actually slightly behind and about 10 feet below in a vault. There is a wild story from the fall of 1876 where this counterfeiter by the name of Benjamin Boyd had been jailed, and an Irish-American crime boss by the name of Big Jim Kennelly was wanting him out because he needed him for counterfeiting operations and for his talents. So Kennelly devised this scheme where Lincoln's body was going to be stolen from the tomb here. They were going to take the body out to Indiana and put it in the sand dunes and hide it there. And after the remains were hidden, Boyd was going to then be ransomed for a release, a full pardon, and I think like $200,000. The scheme ended up being uncovered by the Secret Service. The two guys who were involved, a guy by the name of Terrence Mullen and Jack Hughes, escaped from the site. They actually had some Secret Service guys who were embedded with them. They got here into the tomb and then escaped, but were later captured. Well, then later, Robert Lincoln, his oldest son, opted to have the remains buried down deep to, I guess, avoid any other future issues. So Mary Todd Lincoln is entombed right here behind us. And then Eddie Lincoln and Willie, and then also Tad, who you could see died in 1871. There are 16 marble pillars surrounding this tomb to represent the 15 presidents prior to Lincoln, and then Lincoln himself. And then you see these flags surrounding. Some of them represent the states that President Lincoln's ancestors lived, and then there's also Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois, which is where, of course, Lincoln had once lived at different periods during his life. But yeah, there's the final resting place of Abraham Lincoln. All right, well, there you go. That was the tomb of Abraham Lincoln. So checked off a few things today. Checked off a site on our Route 66 trip, and also checked off another presidential grave in my quest to visit all of the presidential graves. Anyway, we're going to hop back in the car, head down Route 66. Next major destination is going to be St. Louis.